On July 13, 1944, Sergeant Curtis Grubb Culin stood beside a muddy Sherman tank in Normandy. The morning air was quiet except for the sound of distant gunfire. A jeep stopped nearby, and from it stepped General Omar Bradley. Culin knew this moment could decide the future of the war. For 2 weeks, Culin had worked on a strange device made of steel bars. He had no permission, no special tools, only an idea he believed in. The device looked odd, but it could be the key to breaking the German lines. If it failed today, all his work would mean nothing. The problem was the hedgerows, thick walls of earth and bushes that filled the countryside. They looked harmless, but they were hard and deep, built over hundreds of years. Each field was surrounded by them, creating small green boxes of death. For the Americans, every hedgerow was a new battle. German soldiers hid behind the hedgerows, waiting for tanks to come close. When tanks tried to climb over, their front lifted high in the air. That exposed the bottom of the tank, its weakest spot. German gunners would then fire and destroy it in seconds. Hundreds of American tanks had already been lost this way. The soldiers were brave, but the land itself was their enemy. Airplanes couldn't help much because the Germans were hidden. The American advance was stuck, moving only a few yards each day. Sergeant Culin watched his friends die and decided he had to find a solution. He was not an engineer, but he had a clever, practical mind. If tanks could not climb the hedges, maybe they could break through them. He began thinking of how to make that idea real. One day, he saw broken metal rails lying near a destroyed German roadblock. He noticed how strong the steel was, even after heavy explosions. That gave him an idea. What if tanks had metal teeth in front? Those teeth could cut through the hedges instead of climbing them. Culin drew a simple sketch on a piece of paper. It showed sharp steel prongs welded to the front of a Sherman tank. The design was rough, but it could work. He just needed a few men, some tools, and scrap metal. He gathered a few mechanics from his unit and told them his plan. At first they thought it was crazy, a farm plow on a tank. But soon they saw he was serious and decided to help him. They worked secretly at night, using whatever metal they could find. They cut, shaped, and welded the pieces together by hand. The work was hard and dangerous, but no one complained. Each night, sparks from their welding torches lit up the camp. Slowly, Cullin's idea started to take shape in steel. When the first version was ready, everyone gathered to see it. The tank looked strange, like it had metal horns on the front. Culin climbed on top and shouted for the driver to move forward. The engine roared as the tank rolled toward the nearest hedgerow. The steel teeth hit the hedge with a loud crash. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the earth began to break. The tank pushed forward and tore right through the hedgerow. Everyone watching started cheering. It had worked. The men couldn't believe what they had just seen. A simple idea had done what weeks of fighting could not. Cullin's invention let tanks move straight through the thick walls. It gave hope to soldiers who had been stuck for too long. The crew named it the Rhino because of its sharp front and power. Soon other soldiers came to see the strange new tank. Some officers laughed, others looked amazed. But Culin knew he needed approval from the top to make more. He decided to show his invention to General Omar Bradley. It was a bold move, but Culin believed it could save lives. The request was accepted, and a demonstration was arranged. It would take place near St. Lo, in the middle of the fighting. The morning of the test was hot and quiet, the ground still wet from rain. Soldiers from nearby units gathered around the field. They wanted to see if the strange Rhino really worked. Soon a jeep approached, and General Bradley stepped out. Bradley looked at the tank with calm curiosity. He was not easily impressed, but he respected ideas from the field. Culin saluted and explained how the device worked. Bradley listened silently, then gave a small nod to begin. The Sherman tank's engine started with a loud growl. It moved slowly toward a thick hedgerow just ahead. Everyone watched closely as it gained speed. Then the steel teeth slammed into the wall of earth. There was a deep cracking sound as the ground split apart. The tank didn't rise like before. It pushed straight through. Dust and leaves flew in all directions as the path opened. When the tank broke through to the other side, silence fell. General Bradley stared at the broken hedgerow in disbelief. He turned to Culin and asked only one question. "How soon can we make more?" Culin smiled proudly and said, "As fast as we can get the steel, sir." At that moment, the Rhino was officially born. After the test, the news spread quickly through the First Army. Soldiers began talking about Cullin's invention everywhere. Mechanics from other units came to see how it worked. They wanted to build the same device for their own tanks. Bradley ordered every workshop in Normandy to start making the Rhino. Old German roadblocks, fences, and scrap metal were used as material. Men worked day and night to cut and weld the steel bars. Within days, dozens of tanks were fitted with the new device. The design was simple but strong, just 4 steel teeth in the front. They were welded at an angle, sharp enough to dig into the earth. Each tank now looked like a charging animal ready to strike. The soldiers loved how it turned their Shermans into real beasts. The first Rhinos were sent to the front lines near St. Lo. Commanders hoped they would finally break the German defenses. Everyone waited nervously to see if the invention would really help. Culin watched with hope as his idea rolled toward battle. When the Rhinos reached the hedgerows, the result was incredible. The tanks no longer got stuck or lifted their noses. They tore through the earth like it was paper. The soldiers following behind could move faster and safer. The Germans were completely surprised by the sudden change. Their hiding spots behind the hedgerows were no longer safe. American tanks appeared out of nowhere, breaking through walls. German defenses began to collapse one by one. In just a few days, the battle around St. Lo changed completely. The American advance, which had been slow for weeks, gained speed. Tanks moved across the countryside in coordinated waves. Every hedgerow they met was crushed under steel. The success shocked even the higher commanders. They realized how one simple idea had turned the tide of battle. Cullin's invention gave them the tool they desperately needed. The road to victory in Normandy was finally open. Culin didn't care about fame or praise. He only wanted to save lives and help his fellow soldiers. But soon, everyone knew his name across the entire First Army. He had become a hero, though he never asked to be one. Tanks fitted with Rhinos led the way in Operation Cobra. It was the major push to break out of Normandy's tight hedgerows. The Rhinos cut paths for infantry and vehicles to follow. Within days, American forces were racing through open fields again. General Bradley personally congratulated Culin for his idea. He said the invention had saved thousands of lives. Other generals also praised the simple but brilliant solution. Cullin's courage and creativity had changed the course of the war. The press later called it the secret weapon of Normandy. Reporters wrote about how it allowed tanks to break free. Photos of Rhinos crashing through hedges appeared in newspapers. The device became a symbol of American ingenuity. Cullin's workshop never stopped working after that. Every day, more tanks were brought in to get fitted with cutters. The soldiers joked that the Rhino was tougher than the Germans. Each one built meant another platoon could move forward. Soon, more than 500 tanks had the Rhino attached. It became a common sight across the French countryside. The fields that once trapped men now helped them move. The hedgerows were no longer obstacles. They were history. For the first time, American commanders could plan large movements. They didn't have to worry about tanks getting stuck in small fields. The new mobility allowed them to surprise the enemy. It made the entire Allied front much stronger. Soldiers started calling Culin the Farmer of Death. It was a strange nickname, but it came with respect. He had turned a farm problem into a deadly weapon. His idea helped cut open the path to freedom. As the Allied army advanced, the Rhino became a key part of every plan. In villages and farmlands, tanks plowed through walls with ease. German soldiers began to abandon positions faster than before. They realized the Americans could now attack from any direction. The victory at Saint-Lô opened the way to the rest of France. Soon after, American forces began their race toward Paris. Each breakthrough was supported by Rhino-equipped tanks. The invention had proven itself in the most crucial battles. Cullen's small experiment had become a war-changing innovation. It showed how battlefield problems could be solved by simple thinking. Even generals admitted that no scientist could have done it better. It was a soldier's idea born from necessity and courage. By the end of the Normandy campaign, Cullen's name was known everywhere. His invention had helped win one of the hardest fights of the war. The Rhinos kept working until the last hedgerow was gone. And with them, the dream of freedom in France came true. As the tanks rolled forward, the French people began to cheer. They had lived under German rule for years, waiting for this moment. The sight of Rhino tanks breaking through fields gave them hope again. It was a symbol that liberation had finally arrived. Everywhere the tanks went, soldiers followed close behind. They used the clear paths made by the Rhinos to move quickly. Roads that were once dangerous became safe passages. Cullen's invention had changed not only war, but also lives. Commanders soon realized how valuable field innovation could be. They began encouraging other soldiers to think creatively too. The success of the Rhino showed that ideas could come from anyone. Even a sergeant's thought could reshape an entire campaign. Cullen never acted proud about his success. He stayed with his men, working on improvements every day. He wanted the cutters to be stronger and easier to build. His focus remained on helping the troops survive. Sometimes he tested new versions himself, standing right beside the tanks. He trusted his invention and wanted to see it in action. Each test brought dust, noise, and danger. But he didn't care. He knew every improvement could save another life. The front lines moved rapidly after Saint-Lô. The Germans tried to set new defenses, but the Rhinos broke them again. Hedgerows, fences, and walls were crushed under steel. The countryside that once slowed the war now carried freedom forward. For the Allied soldiers, morale had never been higher. They felt unstoppable with the Rhinos leading the way. Each advance brought them closer to ending the war. The impossible terrain was no longer their enemy. By late July 1944, the American army had broken out completely. Columns of tanks stretched for miles across the open fields. The Germans were in retreat, unable to rebuild their defenses. The long stalemate of Normandy was finally over. The success of Operation Cobra opened the road to Paris. Cullen's small invention had played a silent but vital role. Every mile gained was proof of how much it mattered. Even the generals mentioned his name in their reports. Back in the workshops, soldiers kept building more Rhinos. The need for them grew as the army moved eastward. Even in new types of terrain, they proved useful. They became a standard part of American tank warfare. Other Allied forces started copying the design too. British and Canadian engineers studied the Rhino's shape. They made their own versions for their Sherman tanks. Soon, the idea spread beyond Normandy into all of Europe. The Germans, on the other hand, had no quick answer. Their tactics depended on the protection of the hedgerows. Without them, their ambushes failed again and again. Cullen's invention had taken away their greatest advantage. Each new battlefield report proved the same thing. The Rhino had changed how the Allies fought in France. Commanders started calling it one of the most useful tools of the war. It wasn't fancy, but it worked when nothing else could. As the campaign continued, Culin was promoted to staff sergeant. His leadership and creativity had earned him deep respect. He still preferred to work quietly behind the scenes. For him, victory was the only reward that mattered. In August 1944, Allied troops liberated Paris. Crowds filled the streets, cheering and waving flags. Many of the tanks rolling into the city still carried rhinos. They were a reminder of how small ideas create big changes. The war was far from over, but momentum was on the Allies' side. With open ground ahead, tanks could finally fight on their own terms. The road to Germany was now within reach, and the Rhino had helped make that road possible. Cullen's name began appearing in army newspapers and reports. Writers called him the man who cut open France. His face appeared in photos beside the sharp steel prongs. But he always said the real credit belonged to the soldiers who used them. When he met other tank crews, they often thanked him personally. Many told him the Rhino had saved their lives in battle. He always replied humbly, saying it was teamwork that won. Still, they saw him as a true hero among them. The US Army officially recognized Cullen's contribution later that year. He received a medal for his innovation and bravery. General Bradley himself spoke proudly about the invention. He said it proved that courage and thinking could win wars. Even after receiving honors, Culin continued to serve quietly. He never sought fame or attention for what he'd done. To him, it was just his duty as a soldier and a mechanic. But history would remember him as much more than that. After the liberation of France, Cullen's unit kept moving east. The battlefields changed, but his invention stayed useful. Tanks still used rhinos to crush barricades and obstacles. The idea had proven itself in every kind of terrain. In Belgium and the Netherlands, the rhinos helped again. The land was full of ditches, walls, and enemy traps. The sharp steel prongs made it easier to move through them. Cullen's idea saved time, effort, and countless soldiers' lives. By now, his simple design had been copied across the Allied front. From Normandy to the Siegfried Line, the rhinos were everywhere. Each one was slightly different, but served the same purpose. They symbolized creativity, born from the heat of battle. In every army camp, stories about Culin spread among soldiers. They admired how he used ordinary metal to solve an extraordinary problem. He wasn't a scientist or a general, just a man who cared. That made his story even more powerful to everyone who heard it. Military engineers studied the Rhino's design carefully. They realized its strength came from its simplicity. No moving parts, no complicated systems, just strong steel. It was the kind of solution that only a soldier could invent. As the Allied armies reached Germany, new challenges appeared. The land was different. Fewer hedgerows, more cities, and fortifications. Still, the Rhino's strong frame helped tanks break through walls. Its usefulness continued till the war's final months. By now, the Allies were confident and experienced. They had learned to adapt and use every resource wisely. Cullen's invention had taught them a valuable lesson. Innovation could come from anywhere, even the battlefield itself. In late 1944, the harsh winter slowed everything down. Snow-covered roads and tanks struggled through mud and ice. But the rhinos were still mounted, ready for any obstacle. They had become part of every tank crew's identity. The bond between man and machine grew stronger every day. Crews often painted names on their rhino tanks. They treated them like trusted partners in battle. Each rhino carried not just steel, but the spirit of survival. When the war in Europe finally ended, Culin returned home. He had seen the worst and best of humanity. His invention had helped bring victory to thousands, but he remained quiet about his role in it all. The US Army continued to honor him in reports and ceremonies. They called his work an example of true battlefield innovation. Historians later described it as one of the smartest ideas of the war. It proved that courage and creativity could change history. Cullen's fellow soldiers never forgot him. Many wrote letters thanking him after the war ended. Some even kept pieces of broken rhino steel as souvenirs. They saw them as reminders of survival and ingenuity. Back in America, Cullen tried to live a normal life again. He didn't talk much about his invention or the war. He worked hard, stayed humble, and cared for his family. He never saw himself as a hero, only a soldier who did his job. Yet his story continued to inspire engineers and inventors. Military schools began teaching about the rhino's design. They showed how one man's idea could shift the balance of war. It became a lesson in thinking fast under pressure. Documentaries and books later told his story to new generations. People were amazed that such a small idea had such a big impact. The rhino became part of World War II history forever, and Cullen's name stood beside it as the man who made it real. He never received great wealth or fame for his idea, but the respect of his fellow soldiers was worth more to him. Every man who fought in Normandy knew his invention saved lives. That was enough honor for Sergeant Culin. The war left behind scars and memories that never faded, but among them were stories of hope, bravery, and invention. Cullen's story was one of those, simple yet powerful. It showed what determination can do in the darkest times. Historians later said that without the rhino, progress in Normandy might have failed. That would have delayed the liberation of Europe by months. One small piece of steel had helped change the future. It proved that great victories sometimes start with small ideas. In museums today, a few rhino cutters are still on display. Visitors stand beside them, wondering how something so simple worked so well. Plaques tell the story of the man who thought of it first, and his legacy lives on in every person who values ingenuity. Sergeant Curtis Grubb Culin may not be a household name, but his invention changed the course of World War II. It turned obstacles into opportunities and fear into strength. His courage and creativity still inspire generations today. After the war, Cullen's life returned to quiet normalcy. He didn't seek attention or public recognition. Most people around him didn't even know what he had done. He lived simply, proud only of having served his country. His fellow veterans, however, never forgot his contribution. Whenever they met, they shared stories of the rhino tanks. They knew how those metal teeth had changed their fate. Cullen's idea had given them a second chance at life. Many historians later studied the Normandy campaign in detail. They all agreed that the rhino played a key role in success. It was not just a tool. It was a turning point in the war. A reminder that innovation often starts from desperation. Cullen's name began appearing in military journals and studies. He was praised as a man who thought beyond the rulebook. His creativity under fire became a lesson for future soldiers. They learned that courage is not only shown in battle, but in ideas. Engineers admired how his design was both simple and effective. It didn't need new materials or advanced machines, just scrap metal, skill, and a strong belief that it could work. That simplicity made it timeless in the world of invention. Over the years, museums and memorials honored his legacy. His story was displayed beside tanks that once carried rhinos. Visitors often stood silently, realizing how one man made a difference. It showed that true heroism sometimes works quietly behind the scenes. For the soldiers of Normandy, Cullen's name carried deep respect. They had seen firsthand what his idea could do in war. To them, the rhino was not just metal. It was survival. It meant hope in a place where hope was hard to find. Culin himself rarely spoke about those days. When people asked, he only said he was proud of his men. He believed every victory was shared, not owned. That humility made his story even more inspiring. Years after the war, younger generations heard his story. Teachers and filmmakers began telling it to students and viewers. They wanted people to understand the power of thinking differently, that even in war, human creativity can shine through. The rhino became a symbol of problem-solving under pressure. It represented how necessity drives invention in hard times. Soldiers, engineers, and leaders all drew lessons from it. It taught that no obstacle is too strong if you find the right angle. In military schools, cadets studied Culin's approach to innovation. They learned how observation and logic could beat complex problems. His method was simple: look, think, build, and test. That process became a model for modern battlefield engineering. Even today, armies around the world remember his invention. It remains part of the study of World War II tactics, not because of its size or power, but because of its impact. It changed the way soldiers thought about technology in war. Modern tank designs still use ideas born from the rhino. Engineers now add tools to clear obstacles or breach defenses. Those ideas trace back to Culin's first welded steel bars. His creativity set a foundation for future military designs. In many ways, the rhino was more than just a cutter. It represented the strength of human imagination under fire. It showed how one spark of thought could light a path to victory. That message continues to inspire people far beyond the battlefield. Culin's legacy is not written only in books or reports. It lives in the countless lives his invention helped save. Each soldier who made it home carried part of his courage. That is a kind of remembrance no medal can replace. In later years, veterans of the Normandy often spoke about him. They described him as quiet, kind, and determined. He never boasted, even when others praised him. To them, he was the man who gave tanks the power to fight back. When he passed away, those who knew his story mourned deeply. They understood the weight of what he had given to the world. His death marked the end of a chapter, but not of his legacy. The steel of his invention still stood strong in history. Today, when people visit war museums, they see the rhino up close. Its rough steel edges still carry marks of battle and fire. It reminds them that greatness often comes from simple beginnings, and that one soldier's idea can change the world forever. Sergeant Curtis Grubb Culin may not appear in every textbook, but those who study history know the power of his contribution. He didn't just build a machine, he built a path to victory. His courage in thinking differently became his greatest weapon. So when we remember Normandy, we should remember him too. Not just for the steel he shaped, but for the vision he held. In a world full of obstacles, he taught us to find our way through. Sergeant Culin's legacy lives on, in every breakthrough born from courage, from